And so this is our monthly meetup. We have our guest speaker here, Emily. Emily will talk about her career and just prepare some questions and just prepare yourself for a good time. And thanks for joining.
Awesome. I will share my screen now, and I'll wait for you all to tell me you can see it. Well, let me do this. Yeah, okay. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect. Well, first, thanks so much for having me. I was telling everyone in the cohort that I graduated with about this organization, and we were all so jealous that we did not have something like this when we were graduating. We were just sending endless applications with no responses to online forums. So glad this exists. Second, you can see from all my photos, I love renewables, I love climate mitigation, I love nature, So please feel free after this call, whether or not you're seeing it live or you're seeing the recorded version, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to network with you. Just make sure you put in the message invite that you saw this college to climate talk or something, so I make sure I don't miss you. I am happy to network with anyone, but I'm obviously also a woman and I'm a queer woman. So there are added challenges that come with that and entering the field. Obviously, we're in sustainability industry, so it's a little easier, but it's not non-existent. So if anyone on the call or listening to the call would like to network about that, I'm happy to do that. I'm so glad I had mentors who helped me when I was first starting. And I'm also a digital nomad. So the work I currently do, I do from different countries around the world. If you're interested in that, I can help give you advice, some logistics that I had to figure out to make that work with my company. So happy to chat with you about that. The rest of my slides are all organized in a way to kind of be a reference point for you in the future. So I won't talk about everything on the slide, but I hope it can be like a little snapshot of advice that if you're like a year out from applying to jobs and you think back like, oh, what did that girl say about when she was applying to like an electric utility? Hopefully it can be a reference for you. There's tons of resources in the notes, so I'll send out the slides after that that'll have direct links to some of the things that I talk about. And without further ado, I'll get started. So my first stop in climate industries was in climate consulting. Full disclosure, these positions were not full-time positions. They were who I worked with for my senior year capstone and my master's thesis. So I'm sure you will network with others in the industry who are doing this full time and will have more to say, but I'll give you the things I learned. Every slide's kind of organized into these 4 parts of things I wish I knew, actions you can take to set yourself up to join that industry, your pre-graduation options, and then post-grad options. So some things I wish I knew when I first started getting into climate consulting was that you could do private sector, public sector, or university-based types of consulting, which is really unique and really awesome. And there's obviously pros and cons to each of those sectors. It really just depends what works best for you. But it provides so many opportunities for you as you have different appetites for work lifestyles in the future. I love that it has an impact from macro scale to micro. You can work for organizations that are looking at regions of countries or whole countries, or you can just be talking directly to one company, helping them figure out what investment decisions they're going to make. And lastly, I wish that I had known how much of the work was going to be reviewing publicly existing databases and doing statistical analysis. That stuff is fun, but I thought it was going to be 20% of my work and not 50% of it. So that's why I ultimately ended up leaving. But if you love data analysis, it's the place to be. Some things you should definitely make sure you do if you want to get into that industry, study your coding languages. I'm sure you've heard that 1,000 times, but no matter what you do, coding will be helpful, but especially with these roles. You'll see this line on all of my slides. It says review dream job descriptions and then take classes or extracurricular based on that. Doesn't seem like rocket scientist, but young Emily did not think to do that. So I would just like invent in my head what the job was going to be. And then I would get to the job and be like, why isn't it exactly what I came up with in my head with no reference point in reality? So definitely do that when you find a company you like, search through all the existing jobs, network on LinkedIn. For pre-grad options, you can do your co-op and internships, or you can also network with your professors and hope that they have some industry connections so they can set up capstones or theses for you as well. I really loved that I knew that whatever my thesis project was going to be was directly going to be used. So yeah, I think that's a great way to go about it. Post-grad options, I just listed the organizations that I've either worked for or that I have paid for reports from, so that if you are interested in working in this industry in the future, you can hit me up on LinkedIn and I can try to connect you with someone who currently works at the company. I did put in parentheses for GLISA that it's a NOAA CAP RISA office. CAP is Climate Adaptation Partner. And what's great about that is if you want to work for like a NASA or NOAA initiative, but you don't want to just do like the massive behemoth, national stuff, they have their regional offices. So if you're like really passionate about working in Alaska, they have an office there. So I included that in the notes section. My second stop, so this was post-grad, I worked for the United Nations World Meteorological Organization. There were a lot of things that I thought I knew about that work that I quickly learned was not the case. So definitely pay attention to the wish I knew part of this slide. The work is not like an at-will employee contract that you would sign for most entities in the US. It is 1 to 6 month contract lengths, usually 1 month. And every time you're up at the end of that month, that country will kick you out. And so then you have to try to get funding for yourself in order to extend your work, or go back to your home country and wait until funding comes through. It can be really unstable, but I mean, if you love the work, it's worth it. And you'll get better at, finding funding for yourself. When I say not a training ground, I don't mean that to sound like, oh, it's not a training ground. I mean it more as most organizations you go to work in the US, whether they're private, public, or university, they're hiring you hoping that they'll be able to benefit from the skills that you bring, but they'll also help show you so many different paths within the organization and have you grow throughout it, because it costs so much more money to replace someone than it does to keep training someone. That is not the case with the UN. It's really like you come in with the skills that you have, and once they don't need those skills anymore, you're done. They'll hire the next person. Enough people want to work there. So I'm really looking at returning to the UN, but more towards the end of my career, when I've gotten a lot of different skill sets from private sector and public sector that I can then bring back to civil service. And then lastly, I was very surprised to learn that when you're working in the secretariat offices, so not necessarily the on the ground boots work or the like on the ground scientific work, you are not doing the science or the modeling or the engineering, you're coordinating team members who are doing that work. So you're coordinating the publications or the conferences that are had around that work. So I thought I was getting hired to do like inverse greenhouse gas modeling, and I was not getting hired for that. So you should know that before you apply. Some actions to take. There's 6 official UN languages. The more official UN languages you know, the better chance you have of getting hired. I only knew English and like half Spanish. So I still got hired then. I know a lot more Spanish now, but just not at the time. So you still have a chance. Definitely network with your university professors. They have a lot of ins with different UN organizations. One of my professors, he was one of the team of 40 scientists who worked for the organization that I went to go join. So definitely mobilize that. You have a lot of pre-grad options for UN, which you would not think compared to the other slides that I have, but there's so many. A lot of universities will send a delegation every year to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change yearly conference. So if you've heard of the Paris Agreement, that was signed at COP15. So my friends were there when that happened. I went the next year, so I missed it by one, but it's a really unique opportunity to plug into the UN system. And it's really impressive when you're in interviews. My boss who hired me, she had been in the UN system for 15 years and she had never been able to attend a COP conference. So that really stood out, even though I wasn't doing much, but just sitting and listening and trying to absorb. But it does look great. There's also, and again, a lot of these links are in the notes below. There's also a partnership where, and it's usually between the Nairobi UN office, but where you can structure your capstone or your master's thesis around an ongoing initiative that Nairobi office has. And so you can know that your work is not only benefiting outside of your own personal development, but it gets UN work on your resume and gets you networking with those people right away. And then the third is the UN volunteer program. There's 3 ways to volunteer. It's virtual, so like graphic design type stuff, editing, translating. You can do in-person on-the-ground work in your home country, or when you're 25, you can go to do something very similar to the Peace Corps, but through the UN. So you're not representing the US, you're representing the UN, and you can do work in other countries. For postgrad options, I went and listed all of the entities that I think anyone on this call would most relate to, but there's tons, and you can do your own research and find what you think would be the best fit for you. Right, moving on to getting into renewables. I wanted to draw this little concept map before we talked about it because the industry is a lot more complicated than I thought it was when I was starting. That horizontal line that you see is kind of the main big companies that are in the value chain or in the lifetime cycle of a renewable project. Starting at the left, you have your equipment manufacturer. So if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of creating the technology that gets the renewable energy, testing it, improving it, you'd want to work for like a module, turbine, inverter manufacturer. You then go to the company I currently work for, which is a developer. Our job is to take projects from just a plot of land up until 10% design. What I love about working at developers is I get to be a jack of all trades, master of none. I am not the engineer that signs off on any of that shit. So I don't have to get it right. I just have to get it as close as possible to what's right, using as little money as possible and as little time as possible. And that's a fun little puzzle for me. So I love it. If you are someone that likes to be more specific and doesn't want to be a jack of all trades, I put in a lot of our consultants kind of surrounding the developer. So you could see, if you are really interested in cultural resources, more anthropology, but you just want to contribute to the environment, you could go work for a cultural resources consultant. And these consultants inform our EPCs as well. I just didn't think I should put it twice on the slide. So then we go to a financier. A lot of these projects, we don't get our investment money back for 10, 20, 30 years. No developer is paying for that up front. They are all going through a financing institution. So if you got to finance mine, but you want to help the environment, work for that department. Then we go to the engineering, procurement, and construction company. They will do all of the design from 10% to issued for construction and construct it, and then hand it back to us for us to do the operation and maintenance. And that's where we sell to our end customers, which is the electric utility or the large company. Every so often, the electric utility will say that they want to own it themselves, but that doesn't happen very often. So that kind of leads into my next career jump, which was to an electric utility. I went there thinking they made such great renewable energy commitments. I'm going to be part of that. That's not the case. Utilities are normally like they're renewable departments. Their job isn't to design, construct, or operate. Their job is to evaluate bids that are coming in from companies like the one I currently work for, make sure that it meets their energy market responsibilities. And then over the next 30 years, once a project is built, ensure number one, that it's built to the standards that they want, but number two, that we keep true to the energy production promises that we made to them. So it's more of like a monitoring and an evaluation in scope of keeping the lights on for their whole portfolio, which is important work. It's just not what I thought I was doing. The cool thing about utilities is that they're a cross between public and private sector companies. So you get the worst of both worlds, but you also get the best. So for public, like while you're subject to a lot of regulatory concerns, and sometimes you just have to prepare documentation for court cases, you also get guaranteed customers. So it's one of the most stable jobs I've ever had and probably exists within the energy industry. Never had to worry about if I was going to get fired. Never. For private sector companies, obviously, you have to be beholden to like efficiencies and you can't be as innovative because it has to make financial sense, but you also like get cool bonuses and fun little work trips that you wouldn't really get at non-private companies. So I clarified that second bullet already. Actions to take. I think you should really practice STAR style interview questions. This is so typical in the utility industry, and it's really different from how most universities will train their students to answer interview questions. It's really just trying to answer interview questions by talking about past experiences. They're really excited about that. It's dumb, but just, study it. For networking, I really recommend you go to their utility community events because they have set customers. In order to make sure those customers don't get too pissed off at them, they'll do community events every couple of months. And a lot of the networking I did to move from my energy markets department to the renewables department was going there, pretending I was a community member, and then be like, surprise, I want to work in your business. This is what I do. Help me get there. So you have them right at your fingertips. A lot of times it's the managers and the VPs out there. So they're the people to talk to. For pre-grad options, it's just basically co-ops and internships. And for post-grad, I tried to write the names of departments that most people on this call would relate to. They're going to be different at every utility, but in general, those are the ones. And then when I worked at DT, I designed the first community solar program, and part of that was researching existing community solar programs across the country. And the ones that really stuck out to me that I thought were the most robust and resilient, I listed below. So if you don't necessarily want to be reviewing bids that come from me or keep it like monitoring renewables, which I think is really fun too, but if you want to get more involved with like smaller scale renewables that are more socially sustainable, those would be the programs that I think are the ones to look into. And lastly, where I am now, we're at the renewables. Some things I wish I knew, which I'm kind of happy I learned, but the renewables development industry is so, so new. And it's such a weird juxtaposition because our customers are like ancient. And so it's really weird being on the side that's trying to innovate and come up with all these crazy ideas. And then our customers are like, but we need reliable energy. So it's kind of a fun back and forth there. The other thing I love about it being so new is I don't know why the hell my company lets me make the decisions that it does. I'm 28 years old, but nobody knows what we're doing anyways. So they let me decide a lot of shit. It's crazy, but it's really fun and it's really empowering. And it's cool that like even at this early stage of my career, I feel like I'm having like I can see an impact that I personally am making. So it's kind of fun. The other thing I wish I knew, a lot of like it seems like such a behemoth thing, right? Like renewable energy is such a big conversation happening across the US, but because we're so new, consultants and suppliers are not tailored towards us. So for example, batteries, it is a much bigger market for these battery suppliers to build something for electric vehicles than it is for us. So we're having to adapt electric vehicle battery technology to work for our application. So that's kind of strange. A lot of our construction entities are doing so many other industries construction and they just have like one department working on ours. So that can pose some challenges, but I'm sure that'll change as time goes on. And then, of course, whenever policy changes, there's huge impacts to our organization. For example, right now, it's a year of a presidential election. We are under a hiring freeze. That's something that most likely will happen every 4 years. So there's a bit less stability with working in a renewable developer than there is a utility. If you want to get into the industry, definitely familiarize yourself with GIS softwares, CAD softwares, and any energy production softwares. GIS and CAD are like all of the renewable technologies use them for energy production. The other like technologies use different softwares, but for solar, it's always PV-Syst. So absolutely get familiar with that one. Learn how to sell your degree. It is because it's such a new industry, you don't have to just be an electrical engineer, a civil engineer, a structural engineer to get on the team. My engineering degree is like so strange. Whenever I would be in interviews, they'd be like, what the hell is that? One of my coworkers, he isn't even an engineer, but he works as an engineer now. His degree wasn't. So you can totally get onto these teams. You just got to know how to sell yourself. So for example, my degree is climate and space engineering. And the way I would sell it is I would say, like, I take all the same courses as every other engineering degree at University of Michigan, but my focus is on the math and physics behind climate change. And then I would say like how I can directly relate to them. So I'd say like, I can definitely help with your energy production because I understand meteorology. I can definitely help with your hydrology modeling because that was my master's thesis. So you can find ways to sell any degree, honestly. For pre-grad options, of course, co-op and internships, but also build your capstone or thesis around the industry you want to be in. Like, we're not going to partner with people to do their capstones, but you can do some research on key policy changes or key industry questions. You can network. Like somebody on this call, we had a conversation about this. I gave him like 10 different ideas to see what struck with him of these are big industry questions. And you can structure it around that so that when you are selling your degree in an interview, you can be like, I've loved renewables for so long that I decided to try to solve this issue in my senior year capstone. And maybe I didn't solve it, but you know that I know the key issues, and they'll be super impressed. So then for post-grad options, there's really only 2 departments I feel like most people on this call would want to work in, but of course, explore the website, see what works for you. There's 4 different types of renewable development. There's utility, industrial, community, and residential. I think most people on this call would be more interested in the large picture problem solving that comes with the utility scale rather than some of the turnkey solutions that comes with residential. But, you know thyself, do your own research, see what works for you. And then the companies I listed are either companies I've worked for, or I have very close relationships with people who work there. So when it comes time and you want to find a job, if you want to network with me, I can try to put you in contact with somebody there. Okay, I'll leave this slide. I'm not going to walk through all of it, just some general career advice, but I'll pause now and give the opportunity for anyone to ask questions or, yeah, just anything.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I recently switched my major. I was also an engineering major, and
Mm-hmm.
then I had the internship with Level 10 and I saw Clearway too there.
Uh-huh.
And I switched to data science and computer science, but I feel like I'm still pretty new to the industry since I just switched as a junior.
Yeah.
So how do you sell yourself and like, because I feel like now my um experience is not as much as before because I am starting something different. Like
Mm-hmm.
how do you um build, or what kind of things do you like want to focus on apart from like I know you said a couple other things, but now that it's like you're a junior, you need to graduate soon, and I'm covering my major in like 4 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just to
Not
be clear,
four
you're
years,
still
4 semesters.
right. And just to be clear, you're still wanting to work in renewables, just
Yeah.
not do
So
engineering. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So it's in short, I just switched my major. That's the thing. But how do
Yeah.
you now approach it in a different way? And because I feel like now switching my major, I feel like now I'm backlogged compared to where other people in my major are. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to sell what I can do, how do you do it and tie to your new experience and still feel comfortable about it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Before I give this specific advice, I just want to step out and allow you to know that like so many people are constantly changing their minds all the time and not even just in their university program. Like I was just talking to a friend I graduated this morning and I was like, should we just like completely change careers? It's crazy to think like that our society is structured on send an 18-year-old to college and ask them what they want to do for the next 60 years. That's crazy. Like there's just no, it doesn't work like that. So I don't think that from the outside looking in, I don't think that you need to feel behind in any way. I do get why you feel that way though, because so much of college is like setting up the perfect resume for the job you want post college and, milking as much as you can out of just those 4 years.
Mhm.
So to help with that, I
Yeah.
think having a history in engineering is never gonna turn somebody away from you. I mean, if you wanted to like go work as a like literary agent or something, they might be like, engineering has nothing to do with this. But for data science, like nobody will see that you have experience in engineering and think like this doesn't apply at all because the principles that you learn and the problem solving skills that you gain just from even one or two courses in engineering is helpful no matter where you are. And really, the selling your degree now is just about like, oh, in my data science class that was on GIS, like we got to pick what region we wanted to do. And like, I read this article about this like solar project that's massive. It's like 1 gigawatts in Texas. And I was like, I want to learn about all the things on that land or something. Like it could be the smallest thing that took you the smallest amount of time. And you're just showing your passion, because when a company is hiring an entry level employee, they don't expect you to have a ton of applicable experience. They want to see the passion and they want to know that you can learn quickly and that you're like open to learning and you're self-motivated, and all of those things you can communicate with your past internship experience and with the courses that you use and the things you talk about. If you want something more specific, actually on this slide, I think, yeah, my second bullet talks about you can volunteer with organizations you care about and help your career. When I was really trying to break into the renewables industry, because like this is a new industry. Like when I graduated, I was taking a swing that they're going to hire me at some point, but it took a few years for them to be open to hiring younger professionals. And so to get some experience on my resume, I volunteered with Grid Alternatives, and that's a low income solar organization that they'll have opportunities where you can volunteer on installs or you can volunteer to join their Women We Builds. And so many companies send women from all levels of their organization. You have to pay to participate, but like $100 or $200 for your future, where you get a skill and you get to network with all these different people. That's a quick way. There's also Solar Energy International courses that you can list that on a resume, you know, so tons of opportunities.
Great. That is great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. I have like an environmental science degree, but also a history degree. So I have like kind of a interest in maybe the like humanities side of renewables and kind of public outreach. I've done a lot of that kind of work. What would you recommend for someone looking to work in that side of like this industry? Like you mentioned, like community and residential scale developers. Like what would you recommend?
Yeah, I feel like the three that pop into my mind. Number one, if you are more interested in kind of the history side, but still interested in environmental, for almost all of our projects, we have to get cultural assessment reports. And it's trying to tell us if there's any artifacts on the site, but also if there's like any sacred grounds, because so many construction projects will just build right over that. But if we're an industry that's trying to say like, we're renewable energy, we're better for the community, blah, 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 and then we're building over like burial sites, it's going to look real bad. So that is something that we always have to get for a project, and I think would really meld together your love of cultural and renewables. Now, if you are working for the consultant, you're not doing so much of the renewables. So then that brings me to the second one, where you could be the environmental / permitting specialist within a developer. So all of our projects, there's like 10 to 20 different SMEs that touch it. I'm the design engineering SME, but then we have our environmental permitting SME, and their scope is to get our work with consultants to get our wetland delineations, our like migratory species analyses, our current species analyses, our environmental cleanup resources or areas, and our cultural resources. And so then you'll be working on developing renewables and meeting with counties to discuss like what's keeping us from building a project here, what can we do to talk with the local tribes to make them more on board. You know, you're having those conversations, but you're getting to dabble more into the history side. And then the third position that came to mind, most community solar projects that I am familiar with come through utilities. So those are not going to have as many opportunities for you to dip into like really getting to know the communities. I know for the one that I designed at DT, I like pushed and pushed and pushed for them to just place it in the areas where we were removing coal plants, because I felt like if we just poison these people for 30 years and we're going to take away a bunch of their like tax investments from this company, we should at least give them a little bit of money and like something that is better for the environment in their communities. But it wasn't really a conversation of like with communities who wants it where kind of thing. So maybe more cooperative led community solar projects would do that. Cooperatives are usually way more grassroots and involved in the communities. But yeah, if you work for a utility, you're going to be on the opposing side of those community organizations. I was in so many of those meetings and I was like, I would say what the company told me to say, but I would be like, I'd give them a little extra to be like, ask about this, make the organization do what's right, you know? So you will not enjoy working on the utility side for that, I think.
Cool, thank you. I kind of figured after looking into some of it, but yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious. I'm sorry, go on.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Let's do Marley and then Corey.
Okay, well, first I just want to say thank you, Emily. This has been really interesting. I am also kind of interested in like public service policy side. I'm an electrical engineering and business economics student, and so I have kind of been like my business degree. A lot of students who graduate with this degree from my University of Utah, are going into either like policy or like consulting areas. But then also I'm doing the electrical engineering and I want to be in the energy sector. So I'm really curious of kind of how you see yourself going back into kind of policy or civil service area, and when you kind of see that happening, or just kind of what that looks like when you're looking forward.
Yeah, okay. I love that question because you're helping me think about my career. This is great. The main decision I've made since coming back from the United Nations is I need to get insider info if I'm going to like write policy that regulates these people. And because the renewable energy industry is so new, so much of the information on how they operate is very protected. We're not really regulated to have to publish how we operate. I mean, we're definitely regulated where like counties will just say no because they don't want us in their backyard. So they're seeing us, but like on a national scale, we're not having to really answer too much just yet. So a lot of policymakers don't have that inside information. So I'm really kind of looking at my career as I want to spend a solid chunk of years working here. And then I'm the person that knows the information that anybody else who's been working for the policy organization for all these years doesn't know. So since you have that electrical engineering background, that might be the route that you want to take. If you are really passionate about policies, you could take a similar path, but in a different way. So every renewable developer has either a person on staff or a department where their job is to, lobby is the wrong word. Their job is to like interact with community members, interact with local, state, and federal politicians, and really try to learn like what questions they have about the industry, fill in, you know, the answers that help us the most. But that's a really great way for you to be working for a renewable company, get that insider knowledge of how it all works, and then be able to already have the network in place to get those other jobs. I've seen a couple people go from like a developer I'm currently working for to working for the federal government to coming back. So you can like, it seems like you can easily bounce back and forth. I personally like the position I'm in if you do want to go the engineering route as a development engineer, because we're kind of the technical center point of all of the different technical SMEs. So I learn a lot about procurement department struggles, which is a huge policy discussion right now. Ever since the Infrastructure Reduction Act was passed, or infrastructure something passed, the IRA was passed. That has been like a huge black box of how it's getting applied. And like even we don't completely know. So the policymakers certainly don't know. And I get to work with the high voltage engineers. I get to work with the interconnection specialists, so I see how it interconnects on the grid. I get to work with our battery engineers. So you can, I think either of these two routes within the renewable developer company could work. There's also, and I've never done this before, but there's an organization, I think it's called like Tech Congress or something. I could try to find one of the emails and forward it along after this call, but they are like 1 year fellowship opportunities where you get to work as an advisor on different representative offices. It's usually federal government, and you're supposed to be kind of like the expert on said industry. So if like you wanted to break into the industry, but your network that you had like wanted to break into the policies after working at a developer, but your network didn't necessarily accomplish that for you, you could then do this fellowship and you have all the info. You're networking that whole year, getting real time experience, and then can go from there.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I was wondering like how you thought through and like learned across the different roles you've had building your career, like whether you preferred a generalist or specialist role, or is not how you think about it, and like that's not sort of the determining factor in like figuring out, you know, what type of role is a good fit. Is that not one of the main drivers?
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like a lot of the steps in my career was stumbling around like a newborn giraffe, just trying to figure out like what I'm doing. A lot of it's tricky to answer that question because when you guys are entering this industry, it looks vastly different from what it did even just the God, what year is it? Even just the 6 years ago that I entered it. There are internship opportunities, there are entry-level positions that are open and are taking applications. So at my time, it was like, okay, I know I want to work for a renewable company, but they're not hiring entry level right now. What are some things that would be useful? When I went to the work for the UN, it was just like, I want to get out of the US. So that was my only thought. I didn't care what the job was. And it ended up being that. I was like, that's amazing. Then when I came back, renewable companies weren't hiring me yet. And I was like, well, utilities are their customers. Like, that's going to be helpful. So then I went and I worked for the utility. So I really kind of just tried to approach it as, okay, if I can't get my number one pick, then what's the unique thing that is going to stand out to them that'll help them? Yeah.
Yeah, that
But
makes
I
sense.
like that generalist or specialist approach. I think generalist is definitely better in your 20s, because you don't really know what a company looks like and what each industry looks like till you're in it. Like now I could take on a specialist role within a renewable company because I know what the specialist would be doing. But if I just went to a specialist role, I think I'd be really unhappy right now because I might have picked the wrong one. You
Right,
know?
and it's harder to know what actually is the right one. Whereas a generalist role, you realize which parts of it you really would like to dive deep. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and a generalist role will always help you do the specialist role because you get how your one thing interacts with the value chain 3 steps down, you know?
Yeah.
Would you elaborate a little bit more on your work at a utility and kind of what you took away from that and if you'd ever see yourself going back to it?
Oh yeah. So when I was hired, I worked on the energy markets team. I had no idea what that was before I started working there, and I'm so glad that I got that job because it has helped me so much. So utilities are subject. Most utilities are a part of these organizations called ISOs or RTOs, and it's these big non profiting organizations that their sole job is to coordinate every utility in that market and make sure the lights stay on. Our grid is so fragile. Like at any given moment, we are on the verge of a blackout. It is crazy. And so these organizations are really important for coordinating. You know, some of these organizations have like 150, 400 members, and their job is coordinating all of those moving pieces. And so the department I worked at, we were monitoring our generating assets and making sure that they were staying true to our yearly agreements, our seasonal agreements, our daily agreements, and then our every 5-minute agreements. Because if we had promised the utility that we'd be down for 3 days, and then they found, I mean, sorry, not the utility, if we'd promised the ISO or RTO that we'd be down for 3 days, and then they had bought energy from somewhere else, and then all of a sudden we're like, well, it's work, so we're just going to turn it on, it could shut down a portion of the grid. So that was my job day to day. And it is, I've learned now working for 2 different renewable developers, Invenergy and Clearway, and even just working in different departments within DTE, that that is such a black box. And it's really important when it comes time to like sizing projects that we're bidding to utilities, or the reliability components that we can add or take away. Are they needed at that utility in the market it's in? Or is it surrounded by a bunch of nuclear plants and they don't care about reliability? Like those are questions that I'm so glad I was exposed to for those 2 years. And then I networked over to the renewable department, and there was 3 different renewable departments, and I wanted to work on the community solar stuff.
Cool, thank you. What, like when you were working in the energy markets team, like you talk about managing these kind of agreements, what does that like look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so the agreements are all like negotiated far above like what our department was doing. But every year there's this big auction where every member participant will come and will say, like, these are the generating units we have. We believe that they'll be on these dates and off on these dates. This is how far we can push our generating unit. This is how not far we can push it. And then they'll sign up for delivering that energy. And then if we don't deliver it, we could owe like millions and millions and millions of dollars. So it's keeping our organization like, hey, remember what you said? Like, please don't come on early. Or if their outage is delayed, like, okay, we'll lean on your suppliers because like we're paying millions of dollars every day. So that's not great. And then on the day-to-day, well, the seasonal stuff was more about transmission line, like traffic, I guess I would say. So that was just making sure, again, that we were sticking with our yearly deals and that we were buying enough or like renting enough lanes on the transmission lines to go with our yearly commitments. And then daily and the real-time market was us checking in every day with our generating assets and saying, are you comfortable with supplying this tomorrow? Are you having any issues you're noticing? And then on the real-time day, they like coordinating with them and be like, we're noticing an issue. How quickly can we fix this? So we could communicate that to the market. So yeah, it was like 4 different scales there. And the way that it relates to renewables is when I'm like creating an energy production model for solar, I'm putting different probabilities with it so that if they're going to their yearly market and saying the solar will produce this much, they're saying, well, 50% of the time it'll produce that much, but 99% of the time we know it'll produce this much. Or in our real-time day-ahead markets, it's like, how dispatchable can I make the site? So up until now, most solar and wind sites are looked at as like, we'll take all the energy we can get from there and that's it. But dispatchability includes like adding a battery. So it's like, well, we have this energy source that we can turn on and off, and we're not just subject to like, where are the clouds?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Emily, we have a question on the chat from Sally. Let me see if I can pull it up here.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah, okay.
Do you know where to get that sort of insider knowledge for the building/construction industry? Similar to the Solar Energy International courses, maybe? I'm interested in green buildings, decarbonizing existing buildings, and feel out of touch with a lot of how buildings are actually built. Ooh, that is a great question. I'm sure you've heard of LEED, one of the kind of environmental building accreditation sources. I actually have a link to that in one of the sections of these slides. I can't remember which one. But you can do courses. I did one of these when I was in college that teaches you how those accreditations are awarded or not awarded. And you can actually become like a LEED AP, I think is the first level, on like you are qualified to evaluate a building up into a certain level. That's a really great introductory way to understand how that's incorporated. In terms, like you wouldn't see LEED accreditation with renewables though, because there's not really a lot of buildings or structures. We have an O&M building, but they're usually kind of like trailers because people aren't staying in them long term. They're usually out like working on the plant. So yeah, that would be a different industry from renewables, but the LEED I think is a great intro there. I can also list a couple EPCs right now that are like kind of leading across the country, and then you can go onto their websites or see if they're at any career fairs. There's no way in hell at least one of these EPCs isn't coming to your career fair. So yeah, I'll list those now. That's Burns and McDonnell, Blattner, Solve, that's SOLV, Mortensen, Rosenden. I think that's all of them that I like know of off the top of my head. Yeah, but those would be great people to network with. And yeah, maybe you could even find on LinkedIn like that company plus like environmental building or something. And I'm sure there's a department that does it there. See if there's other questions in here.
I'm really impressed with this group. Every question has been insanely good.
Yeah.
I have a slightly off-topic question, but you mentioned transmission, and also being interested in some policy stuff. So I was wondering, if you saw FERC's Order 1920 as gonna have a big impact in working towards sorting out some of the transmission issues that the grid is facing.
Ooh, that like very, 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 very vaguely rings a bell. And correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the plan for kind of the larger transmission lines that are supposed to be connecting different regions of the country? So
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like the requiring planning ahead 20 years in advance for interregional connections, but also just trying to get stakeholders more involved in just general transmission planning of like all the utility and kind of transmission supplier organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'll have a huge impact on the developer industry specifically, because a lot of times what we're doing now, all the low-hanging fruit of good place, you know, quote unquote, good places to build solar or wind, like those have all been developed. That's it, they're gone. And we still have an energy need. And so if we can, so we've been figuring out how to build and spend the money to build in like these less ideal locations. But if we could build in medium, less ideal locations instead of extremely hard, less ideal locations, it'll definitely get utilities more excited to buy our project that isn't crazily overpriced because of where we're having to build it. The other questions that you mentioned, I feel like are much better answered by someone who is currently working in a utility. That is not a question that my department like looks at all in a renewable company. It was definitely one that I looked at when I worked at the utility 4 years ago. But yeah, I don't know any of the updates that provides. An interconnection teammate would know that though. So if you look at any developer that you're interested in working with and you want to network with someone on the interconnection team, that would definitely, they would know for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. We should have time for 1 or 2 more questions. And I do have one question for you, Emily.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll save it for last unless we have no questions at the moment. Yeah, I'll just go for it. So we saw your career path, Emily, and obviously you've kind of like moved towards the NGO, towards more of the energy where you are right now. So my
Yeah.
question is for you is, where do you see Emily in the future? Where do you see your
Ooh.
career from this point forward?
Yeah. It's funny, I actually, and you guys are gonna think this sounds crazy, but I purposely don't think more than 2 years ahead, because so many of my career opportunities have been things I never would have thought of, but just like came up and I was like, oh my God, I would love to do that. I also envision that like I'll be changing careers every 5 to 10 years. There's just so much cool stuff to do on this planet, you know? We only got like 90 years. Like I gotta hop around and try some different stuff. So most likely I see myself kind of going the entrepreneur route, doing something around sustainability. End of my career, I definitely see myself working in more of a policy role or returning to the UN with kind of the things that I had learned in the other parts of my career and doing some civil service with that. But I'm really enjoying what I'm doing right now. So I want to stick with that for at least the next 2 years.
That's a great answer. And I feel like oftentimes when we talk to professionals, we sometimes forget that they also have goals and they want to keep growing. So just wanted to bring that out. Great
Love
answer.
that.
Right. Any takers for the last question?
I can ask one more question.
Go for it, Natalie.
So, if I don't know, do you, in your opinion, if something, let's say like COVID happened, and you know, the effects of COVID and how things just went down, what would you say renewable like would react to stuff like this and in the job market?
Ooh, that is a great question. So first of all, I want to say I'm so happy that when COVID hit, I was working at a utility. Nobody got fired. And everybody needs the lights on, especially when we're all working from home. So that was super, super stable. From what I hear from my colleagues happen in the renewable industry is kind of similar to the utility industry of the utilities weren't stopping. So our money coming in wasn't stopping. And so much of the work that we do can be done remotely. So sure, there was a transition just like there was anywhere in the industry. But now that that first Band-Aid has been ripped off, like so many companies, even if they are at having people come back into the office, they have the infrastructure in place and the plan in place. So I don't see it anytime soon being an issue. Now, of course, like renewable development isn't as stable as utilities. It's still pretty stable, but not as. So I think it's really important if you want to get into the industry to not lock yourself into one technology. You know, I didn't hear of anyone getting laid off from Clearway or Invenergy during the pandemic, but there's always a burgeoning industry. So like wind is still happening and it's still important, but compared to 20 years ago, solar is way bigger. And I'm sure 10, 20 years from now, batteries are going to be far bigger. Like that's already starting to take up. So I'm not just solar. I'm also learning as much as I can about batteries. Then green hydrogen, I think, will be next. And we have teams growing at our company for that. So just always making sure you're ahead of the curve of, you know, what the company's needs are, or trying to learn as much about that as possible. It makes you an invaluable employee.
Yeah, just like how you're putting yourself ahead of what the employers will look when you graduate. So I think
Yeah,
keep that attitude, I would say.
absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much again. I'm so happy this organization exists, and I think it's so awesome that y'all at your young age went and started your own freaking organization. That's great. You guys are killing it.
No, thanks, Emily, for joining us, and thanks everyone else too. And before you disconnect, we always have this tradition of taking a screenshot from everyone that attended and share it around. So if you feel comfortable, you can turn on your camera for just like 1 second. I'll take a screenshot and then I'll send it over so everyone can have it for their LinkedIn's, or just I keep them for myself to like remember the meeting. So I'll count
Nice.
down to 3. If anyone needs more time, just unmute and let me know. But if not, I'll take a screenshot in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Cool. Well, that's it for tonight. Again, thanks everyone. Thank you, Emily. Feel free to follow up, and it's been a great pleasure hosting you all tonight.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you so much.